For as long as I can remember, I've lived my life within the firm embrace of tradition. My name is Samuel Adler, and I am a man who was certain of his purpose, until the fragility of life proved how quickly certainties can unravel. Let me start at the beginning. I was raised in a family where faith wasn't just a personal conviction, but a shared legacy. My ancestors had devoted themselves to honoring the sacred teachings passed down through centuries, and so had I. The Torah was my compass, the rhythm of my existence. Its laws guided every aspect of my being, from the prayers that punctuated my day to the counsel I provided to those who sought wisdom from me. My mornings began before dawn in the quiet solitude of prayer. The synagogue, with its simple walls and eternal echo of whispered devotion, became an extension of myself. I'd watch the young students' eager faces as I unraveled ancient verses for them, planting seeds of understanding that I hoped would someday blossom. Weddings, funerals, community gatherings, these were the events where I carried the Torah's truths like a lantern, illuminating life's most profound moments. I wore the mantle of spiritual leadership with pride, though it was not without weight. People looked to me for answers, guidance, reassurance. My shoulders bore their struggles, their fears, and their doubts. I believed it was my purpose, no, my sacred duty, to carry that weight. It defined me. Yet for all my devotion, there was an unyielding wall within me. It wasn't an outward animosity. I harbored no ill will toward Christianity or other beliefs, but I dismissed them. Jesus, the central figure of their faith, was a stranger I had no intention of inviting into my world. To me, Christianity was a deviation, a distortion of the truth set forth in the Torah. I would listen with respect when challenged by others, but inwardly I fortified my certainty, telling myself I understood the fullness of God's design far better than they ever could. This confidence was my armor, and I clung to it fiercely. I saw my path as unwavering and unshakable. Life, however, doesn't ask for permission before rearranging everything you think you know. It was late one Friday afternoon. Shabbat was just hours away, and I was caught in the familiar rhythm of preparation, checking the candles, ensuring the hall was ready, rehearsing my sermon in my mind. My wife Sarah teased me, as she often did, about my meticulousness, but there was warmth in her voice that softened her chiding. She knew how seriously I took my responsibilities. As I reached for the service book to double-check a passage, an unfamiliar tightness gripped my chest. At first, I ignored it. A man of my position didn't yield to discomfort easily. But the sensation didn't fade. It spread like ink spilled on paper, creeping into my shoulders and arms with a relentless weight. "Samuel, are you all right?" Sarah's voice pierced the haze of my thought. Her concern was enough to make me pause, though I tried to dismiss it with a shaky smile. "Just tired. It's nothing." But even as I spoke, I knew I wasn't convincing either of us. The tightness deepened, stealing my breath in shallow gasps. My hands, steady for decades, trembled. Panic began to coil itself around me like a serpent, cold and suffocating. Sarah insisted I sit, her voice laced with urgency. I didn't argue. The weight pressing down on me left no room for pride. Even seated, the pain intensified. It wasn't just physical. It was something more, an invisible hand gripping my very soul. Time blurred in those moments. Sarah's frantic call for help, the hurried arrival of paramedics, the dull thud of my pulse against my ears, all of it merged into a disjointed tapestry of sensation and sound. As they carried me toward the ambulance, I caught Sarah's gaze through my fading vision. The anguish on her face carved a new kind of pain in me, one deeper than any physical ache. "Hold on, Samuel," she cried, her hands trembling as they reached for me. "Hold on." I tried to respond, but my voice, the voice that had comforted so many, betrayed me. My world darkened, collapsing inward like the last flicker of a dying candle, and then nothing. It's strange to describe what came next. People often speak of darkness as an end, a void, but for me it was a pause, a liminal space between the life I knew and something else entirely. In that pause there was a pull, gentle yet insistent, drawing me toward what I could not yet understand. Little did I know the life I had built with such certainty was about to be redefined. Little did I know my journey was only just beginning. As my eyes opened, or at least what felt like opening, I realized that I was no longer bound to the body that had carried me through life. I wasn't Samuel Adler anymore, not entirely. My name still rang true, but my form had shifted, my identity unraveling and reknitting itself into something I couldn't yet define. I saw it, the ambulance. Its cramped interior was filled with frantic movement. The paramedics hovered over my lifeless body like dancers caught in a storm, their precise hands working tirelessly against the ticking clock. Through what seemed to be soft currents of air, I floated above them, observing their haste. One of them pressed on my chest in rhythmic compressions, her eyes steely with focus. Another man hovered nearby, gripping defibrillator paddles, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he prepared to deliver a life-shattering jolt. They couldn't see me, not the real me, the me that existed outside the confines of that pale, lifeless body on the stretcher. The realization struck me with an odd kind of clarity. I wasn't afraid. If anything, I felt detached, a quiet acceptance of the surreal reality unfolding before me. I turned my gaze outward and saw her, my Sarah. She had followed the ambulance, her car speeding along like a guardian angel, refusing to give up. Now, she stood outside the emergency vehicle, her hands pressed against its cold glass. Tears streaked her cheeks, her lips moving silently, whispering prayers in a rhythm I knew by heart. My soul ached at the sight of her anguish. I tried to reach for her, to comfort her, but my hand passed through the glass as if it were made of nothing more than mist. I couldn't touch her. I couldn't save her from the pain of watching me fade. And then I felt it, a pull, gentle yet insistent. It wasn't physical. It wasn't a shove or a yank. It was an invitation, wordless yet undeniably real. It beckoned me away from the chaos of the ambulance and toward something I couldn't comprehend. Turning toward this mysterious pull, I noticed the light. At first it flickered softly at the edge of my awareness, a glow that seemed almost shy. But as I focused, it grew, illuminating the space around me. It wasn't blinding like the sun or harsh like sterile hospital bulb. It was warm, alive, pulsing with a steady rhythm of purity that I could feel but not explain. The light hummed with an energy that resonated deep within me, touching places I hadn't known existed. There was a presence within that light, a being aware of me. I didn't know who or what it was, but I felt its gaze without seeing its eyes. It was as if the universe itself had turned its focus to me, cradling me in both curiosity and intimacy. This presence didn't demand anything, nor did it try to persuade me to move closer. It simply waited, a still and patient force that seemed timeless. I hesitated. The teachings of the Torah grounded me, shaping my worldview with absolute conviction. My faith had always been rooted in what I could understand, touch, and interpret through sacred texts. This light, this presence was foreign. It didn't fit the framework of my beliefs. I wanted to reject it, to tell myself it was nothing but the hallucination of a failing mind. But the pull wouldn't relent. Despite my resistance, I began to drift toward it. The presence grew stronger as I moved closer, its warmth enveloping me in layers I didn't realize I needed. It wasn't merely an external force. It touched the very core of my being, peeling back layers of doubt, pride, and pretense. Every emotion I had buried, every thought I had suppressed, came to the surface raw and exposed. The light didn't judge, it simply saw. With each step, if they were indeed steps, I felt my skepticism crumble. The teachings of my ancestors, the commandments I had upheld, the beliefs I had fortified, all stood before this presence, small and fragile. It didn't dismiss or diminish them. It embraced them, drawing them into something larger, something whole. The last remnants of the physical world, the ambulance, the paramedics, even Sarah's tear-streaked face, blurred into the background as the light became my focus. I couldn't turn away. It wasn't forceful. It was compelling in its truth, undeniable in its grace. And then I was engulfed. The light surrounded me completely, a cocoon of peace and warmth. I felt no fear, no doubt, only an anticipation that stirred deep within me. This was the threshold, the place between life as I had known it and something else. Whatever awaited me beyond that threshold, I knew it would be extraordinary. It wasn't an end, it was a beginning, one that would reshape everything I thought I understood. It's difficult to put into words what I felt as I moved toward the light. The pull wasn't something I could fight, nor was it something I truly wanted to resist. It called to me, not with force, but with a whisper that resonated deep within my soul. I had spent my entire life anchored in the teachings of the Torah, in the comfort of certainty. Now, however, I found myself drifting into a reality I could neither explain nor ignore. The light grew brighter with every step, or at least it felt like I was stepping forward, though I wasn't sure I had a body to step with. It was as if my essence itself was being drawn closer to this extraordinary presence. The warmth emanating from the light was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the warmth of the sun on your skin or the gentle heat of a fire on a cold night. This warmth reached deeper, wrapping around the very core of who I was. It was love, pure, undiluted, and overwhelming. Then there was the presence. It became apparent to me as I moved closer that the light wasn't just light. It was alive, aware, and infinitely holy. It wasn't just a manifestation of energy or a metaphorical concept. It was a being. I didn't see a face or hear a voice, yet I knew, without a doubt, that this presence was looking at me. No, it was looking into me. It saw everything, every thought I had ever had, every deed I had ever done, every hidden corner of my soul. I was laid bare before it, exposed in a way that would have been unbearable under any other circumstances. And yet, I didn't feel judged. I felt known. This revelation shook me to my... I had always imagined God as distant, unreachable, a being whose holiness was so vast that it could only be approached through rituals, commandments, and centuries-old traditions. Yet here I was, face to face, or soul to soul, with a presence that felt as personal and intimate as a loving parent. I was overwhelmed by its magnitude, and yet I wasn't afraid. The fear that had gripped me in life seemed almost laughably trivial in the light of this moment. The presence communicated with me, though not with words. It spoke directly to my soul in a way that was both immediate and impossible to misunderstand. It told me to come closer, to let go of my doubts and fears, and to trust. Trust. That word echoed through me, resonating like a note struck on a perfect, divine instrument. But trust wasn't easy for me. My faith, my identity, my very sense of purpose had been built on certainty, on laws and teachings that left little room for ambiguity. To trust in something I didn't understand, something that didn't fit neatly into the framework of my beliefs, was almost unbearable. And yet, the pull of the presence was undeniable. It didn't demand my trust, it simply invited me into it, wrapping me in its relentless gentleness. As I moved closer, the light intensified, not just in brightness but in substance. It began to show me things, not as visions or images, but as a series of profound understandings that poured directly into my consciousness. They were truths that transcended anything I had ever studied or taught. I saw glimpses of creation, moments where the very fabric of existence was woven together with love and intention. I understood, in a way that words could never convey, the interconnectedness of everything, the unity of all creation under one divine plan. And then the presence within the light shifted, becoming clearer, more defined. It wasn't just an abstract force anymore. It took form, not a physical form, but a shape that my mind could comprehend. I saw a figure standing before me, radiant and majestic, yet deeply personal and approachable. His presence filled me with awe and reverence, yet it also felt profoundly familiar, as though I had always known him. It was him. I knew it instantly, even though every fiber of my being wanted to resist the realization. It was Jesus. The name struck me like a thunderclap, reverberating through the deepest parts of my soul. I had spent my entire life dismissing him, relegating him to the margins of history as a figure of divergence, a false messiah whose teachings contradicted everything I held sacred. And yet, here he was, real, undeniable, and standing before me in a light that spoke only of truth. I wanted to look away, to deny what was happening, but I couldn't. His gaze held mine, not with force, but with an unyielding kindness that left no room for escape. Those eyes, there was no hatred, no condemnation in them. They were filled with a depth of love and compassion that I had never seen. It was as though he saw me, not just the rabbi, the scholar, or the leader, but the man beneath all the titles and roles. He saw my fears, my doubts, my failures, and my pride, and he loved me anyway. "Samuel," he said, his voice not audible but resonating directly within me. "You know who I am." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: disbelief, confusion, awe, and a burgeoning sense of understanding that I wasn't ready to face. He didn't press me. He simply waited, his presence as patient and unwavering as the mountains. "You have dedicated your life to God," he continued, his tone filled with both kindness and authority. "You have sought truth with all your heart. But there is more to see. There is more to understand." His words pierced through me like a blade, not to wound, but to reveal. For decades, I had believed that my understanding of God was complete, that the teachings of the Torah contained the fullness of divine. And yet, in this moment, I knew that I had only seen a shadow of the greater reality. Jesus raised his hand, or perhaps it was the light itself that moved, and suddenly I was overwhelmed by a series of revelations. They weren't like visions, not in the way I had imagined them. They were truths, layered and intricate, unfolding within me like a symphony of understanding. I saw the Torah, the sacred text that had guided my life, not as a separate entity, but as a thread intricately woven into a larger tapestry. I saw the sacrificial lambs of the temple, their blood spilled for the atonement of sins, and understood how they pointed to something far greater. I saw the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promises made to them by God, and how those promises culminated in the figure standing before me. The most overwhelming realization came when I saw the cross. It wasn't just an instrument of death or a symbol of division between faith. It was the center of the divine plan, the point where God's love and justice met in perfect harmony. I saw Jesus on that cross, his body broken and bloodied, and yet, even in his suffering, he radiated the same love and peace that I now felt. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of these revelations settled over me. How could I have missed it? How could I have spent my entire life studying the Torah, immersing myself in its wisdom, and yet failed to see its fulfillment? It wasn't that the Torah was wrong or incomplete. It was that I had been blind to its deeper truth. The Torah wasn't just a set of laws. It was a map, a guide that pointed directly to him. Jesus stepped closer, his presence filling every corner of my awareness. "You are loved, Samuel," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. "Even in your doubt, even in your resistance, you have always been loved." Those words broke me in a way that nothing else ever had. For so long I had clung to my certainty, to the identity I had built as a rabbi. Now, in the presence of this overwhelming truth, I realized how small and fragile those certainties were. And yet, I wasn't diminished. I was embraced, accepted, and given a glimpse of a love that transcended all understanding. "There is a purpose for you," Jesus said, "but first, you must see." And with that, the light around me shifted, and I felt myself being drawn deeper into its depths. Whatever lay ahead, I knew it would change everything. When I was a boy, my father used to tell me stories about the great leaders of our people: Moses, David, Elijah. He would speak of their trials, their faith, their victories, and how they carried the mantle of God's covenant. To me, they were larger-than-life figures, untouchable in their devotion and closeness to the divine. I admired them, even idolized them, but I never once thought that I, Samuel Adler, could ever stand in their presence, let alone face the source of their strength. And yet here the light that surrounded me softened, and within its radiant glow, a figure began to emerge. He stepped forward, each movement deliberate and fluid, like a stream carving its way through a rocky landscape. He wasn't a man in the way we think of men, bound by the imperfections of flesh and bone. No, he radiated something beyond human, a purity, a completeness that left me breathless. Yet he was familiar, deeply so, as if my soul had always known him. His face was kind, serene, and filled with an understanding that pierced through every defense I had ever built. His eyes held a depth I could barely fathom, as though they contained the entirety of creation within them. They weren't just looking at me, they were looking into me, seeing every thought, every fear, every doubt I had ever harbored. For a fleeting moment I wanted to turn away, to shield myself from the exposure. But his gaze wasn't harsh or accusing. It was compassionate, patient, and full of love. "Samuel," he said, his voice resonating not in my ears but in my very... It wasn't a sound, it was a truth, a vibration that reached the deepest parts of me. "You know who I am." And I did. Though I had spent my entire life dismissing him, though his name had been little more than an object of academic curiosity to me, I now knew without a shadow of doubt who stood before me. It was Jesus. My first reaction was rejection, a desperate attempt to cling to the worldview that had defined me for decades. This couldn't be real. Jesus was a man, a teacher, perhaps even a prophet to some, but certainly not the Messiah. He was a figure whose teachings diverged from the Torah, whose followers had built a faith that I had always considered misguided. And yet, here he was, standing before me, undeniable in his presence. "You are mistaken," I tried to say, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to speak them, because deep down I knew they weren't true. The certainty that had sustained me throughout my life crumbled in the face of this overwhelming... You have sought truth all your life," Jesus continued, his tone gentle yet firm. "You have studied the words of the Torah, the writings of the prophets, the Psalms of David. You have dedicated yourself to understanding the covenant between God and his people. But Samuel, there is more to the story, more to the story." The phrase struck me like a bolt of lightning. I had always prided myself on my knowledge, my understanding of the Scriptures. I had pored over every word, every letter, convinced that I was uncovering the fullness of God's plan. But now, as I stood before Jesus, I realized how narrow my vision had been. Before I could respond, the light around us shifted, and I was no longer standing in its glow. Instead, I was surrounded by scenes from the Scriptures, each one vivid and alive. It wasn't like reading the words on a page or even imagining the stories in my mind. These moments unfolded before me as though I were there, a witness to... I saw Abraham on Mount Moriah, his hand trembling as he raised the knife over his son, Isaac. I felt the weight of his anguish, his unwavering faith in God's command. And then I saw a lamb caught in the thicket, offered as a substitute, a sacrifice that spared Isaac's life. The scene shifted, And I saw Jesus carrying a wooden cross on his back, his body broken and bloodied. The parallels were undeniable. Isaac's story wasn't just an account of obedience and faith, it was a foreshadowing, a glimpse of the greater sacrifice that was yet to come. Next, I saw the bronze serpent Moses raised in the wilderness, a symbol of healing for the Israelites who looked upon it. Intertwined with this image was Jesus, his arms outstretched on the cross, offering salvation to all who would turn to him. The connections were breathtaking in their clarity. These weren't isolated stories or symbols, they were threads woven into a tapestry that now revealed its full design. The visions continued, prophecy after prophecy, each one pointing to Jesus as the Messiah. I saw the suffering servant described in Isaiah, bearing the sins of many, despised and rejected, yet bringing peace through his wounds. I heard the words of Zechariah, "They will look on me, the one they have pierced," and saw their fulfillment in Jesus' crucifixion. I saw the promise to David, that his throne would endure forever, realized in a kingdom not of this world but of eternity. Every moment I had ever studied, every text I had ever taught, took on new meaning. The Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, they weren't separate from Jesus. They were the foundation upon which his life, his mission, and his sacrifice were built. The truth was inescapable. Jesus wasn't a deviation from the covenant. He was its fulfillment. As the visions faded, I found myself back in the light, standing before Jesus once more. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to process everything I had seen. "How could I have—" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and awe. "How could I have studied the Torah, the words of the prophets, and not seen what they were pointing to?" "You saw what you were ready to see," Jesus replied, his tone filled with compassion. "The law and the prophets are not void, they are fulfilled in me. Every word, every commandment, every promise, they were always leading here." I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his words and the magnitude of what I had experienced. For so long I had clung to my understanding of God, my identity as a rabbi, and the teachings of the Torah. Now, in the presence of Jesus, I realized how limited that understanding had been. It wasn't that the Torah was wrong or incomplete, it was that I had only seen a fraction of its truth. Jesus stepped closer, his light enveloping me. "You are loved, Samuel," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Even in your doubt, even in your resistance, you have always been loved. And now you are called." "Called?" I asked, my voice barely. "To what?" "To share what you have seen," he replied. "To be a bridge between the old and the new, between the covenant and its fulfillment. Your faith, your devotion, your knowledge of the Torah, they are gifts, and now you are called to use them for a greater purpose." The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. How could I, a man who had spent his life dismissing Jesus, now proclaim him as the Messiah? How could I face my family, my congregation, my community, and tell them that everything I had once rejected was true, and yet I knew I couldn't turn back? The truth I had seen was too profound, too transformative to ignore. "There will be challenges," Jesus said, as if reading my thoughts. "There will be those who resist, who doubt, who reject. But you are not alone. The same light that guided you here will guide you as you walk this new path." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead, but also filled with a peace that surpassed understanding. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same. The light enveloped me, its warmth reaching into the very depths of my being. I wasn't merely a man standing in its glow. I was a part of it, woven into its fabric as though I had always belonged here. Jesus remained before me, his presence unwavering, his gaze penetrating yet kind. He didn't speak, not immediately, but his silence carried an anticipation, a promise of revelation. And then it began. It wasn't a voice that guided me. It wasn't words or instructions. It was something far deeper, an unfolding of truth that transcended language. It was as though the light itself spoke, pouring understanding directly into my soul. The first vision appeared before me, vivid and alive, more real than any memory I had ever experienced. I was standing in the wilderness, the harsh desert air pressing against my skin. Before me, the Israelites were gathered, a sea of humanity weighed down by the sins and struggles of their journey. In their midst, Moses stood tall, his hand raised to reveal the bronze serpent mounted on a pole. I had studied this moment countless times, dissecting its meaning, its symbolism. But now I saw it anew. The serpent wasn't merely a representation of healing, it was a shadow, a precursor to something far greater. The vision shifted, and I saw Jesus on the cross, his arms outstretched, his body broken, his face etched with both agony and divine love. The serpent and the Savior merged in my understanding, their significance intertwined. The healing offered to the Israelites was a glimpse of the redemption now offered to all humanity through him. I tried to speak, to question, but the light carried me forward, revealing another scene. This time I was standing in the temple, the air heavy with the scent of incense and the distant echo of prayers. Before me was the altar, where a lamb, pure and unblemished, was prepared for sacrifice. Its innocent eyes met mine, and I felt a pang of sorrow. This lamb was a symbol of atonement, a life given to cleanse the sins of the people. But as I watched, the lamb transformed, its form shifted, and standing in its place was Jesus. The connection was undeniable. The sacrifices of the temple were not ends in themselves, they were signs, pointing to the ultimate sacrifice that he had fulfilled. His blood, his suffering, was the culmination of every ritual, every commandment, every act of devotion. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of these revelations settled over me. How could I have missed this? How could I have spent my life teaching these stories without seeing the truth that bound them all together? The Torah wasn't separate from Jesus. It was the foundation upon which his truth was built. The light shifted again, and I found myself standing on Mount Moriah, the place where Abraham had brought his son Isaac to offer him as a sacrifice. The scene unfolded with startling clarity. I saw Abraham's trembling hand as he raised the knife, his heart heavy with obedience to God's command. But then I saw the angel intervene, providing a ram caught in the thicket as a substitute for Isaac. And in the same moment, I saw Jesus once more, carrying his cross toward Golgotha. The parallel was unmistakable. Just as the ram had been offered in place of Isaac, so too had Jesus been offered in place of us all. The covenant established with Abraham was not broken. It was fulfilled in a way that transcended every expectation. The visions continued, each one building upon the last. I saw the suffering servant described in Isaiah, bearing the sins of many, rejected and despised, yet bringing healing through his wounds. I saw Zechariah's prophecy come to life. They will look on me, the one they have pierced. I saw David's psalms echoing with promises of a kingdom that would endure forever, a kingdom that Jesus now embodied. Every story, every commandment, every prophecy I had studied pointed to him. It wasn't just a single thread in the tapestry of Scripture, it was the entire design. The Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, they were all pieces of a puzzle that now fit together perfectly. And at the center of it all was Jesus. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was seeing. How could I have missed this? I whispered, my voice trembling with both sorrow and awe. How could I have studied the Torah, taught its truths, and not seen what they were pointing to? Jesus stepped closer, his light enveloping me. You saw what you were ready to see, he said, his tone filled with compassion. The Torah is not void. It is fulfilled in me. Every word, every promise, every commandment, it was always leading here. His words pierced through me, breaking down the walls of doubt and pride that had fortified my understanding for so many years. The Torah wasn't diminished by Jesus, it was completed, perfected in Him. My faith, my devotion, my identity as a rabbi, they weren't contradictions to this truth, they were its foundation. As the visions faded, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The questions that had haunted me, the doubts that had lingered, were replaced by an understanding that felt both immense and intimate. The light around me softened, and Jesus' presence became clearer, more tangible. "You are called, Samuel," he said, his voice steady and firm, "to share what you have seen, to be a bridge between the old and the new, between the covenant and its fulfillment." The thought terrified me. How could I, a man who had spent his life rejecting Jesus, now proclaim him as the Messiah? How could I face my family, my congregation, my community, and tell them that everything I had once dismissed was true? The weight of the calling felt almost unbearable. "There will be challenges," Jesus continued, as if reading my thoughts. "There will be those who resist, who doubt, who reject. But you are not alone. The same light that guided you here will guide you as you walk this new path." His words offered a reassurance that I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same. When I found myself back in the soft radiance of the light, Jesus stood before me, his presence steady and unwavering. His gaze held mine, filled with compassion, and yet I could sense an urgency in his eyes, a purpose he was preparing to reveal. Though my heart was still overwhelmed by the visions I had witnessed, I knew that the encounter was far from over. I knelt before him, my voice trembling as I whispered, "Why me? Why have you shown me these things?" Jesus stepped closer, his light enveloping me in warmth that calmed my racing thoughts. "Samuel," he said, his tone gentle yet firm, "you are loved and you are chosen. You have been given these truths to carry, not for yourself alone, but for others. You are called to share what you have seen." The words settled over me like a heavy mantle. For decades, I had lived my life within the framework of the Torah, teaching its truths and guiding others in its ways. Now the truths I had been shown challenged everything I thought I knew, stretching the boundaries of my understanding. And yet I couldn't deny them. They were real, undeniable, and transformative. But the thought of sharing them, to proclaim Jesus as the Messiah, felt impossible. "How can I do this?" I asked, my voice fragile under the weight of uncertainty. "How can I tell my family, my congregation, my people? They will think I have lost my faith, that I have abandoned the covenant. They will reject me." Jesus' expression softened, his compassion deepening. "It will not be easy," he said, "but you will not walk this path alone. The same light that guided you here will guide you as you carry it forward. You are not abandoning the covenant, you are fulfilling it." The truths of the Torah have always pointed here to me. I struggled to reconcile his words with the fear gripping my heart. For so long I had prided myself on my certainty, my ability to explain the Torah's depths, its laws, and its promises with confidence. Now those certainties felt small, fragile in comparison to the truths I had witnessed. To share them would mean stepping into the unknown, risking everything I had built. But Jesus' presence was unwavering, his love steady and constant. "Samuel, you have been faithful," he said. "You have sought God with all your heart, and now you are being given the fullness of his plan. You are called to be a bridge, to unite the old with the new, the law with grace." A bridge. The word lingered in my mind, echoing with meaning. Could it be possible to remain true to the Torah, to honor its sacredness, while also embracing Jesus as the Messiah? Could I reconcile the teachings of the law with the fulfillment of grace? The path seemed daunting, but Jesus' words planted a seed of hope within me. "Return," he said, his voice steady yet filled with tenderness. "Go back to those who love you, to those who seek truth, and share what you have been shown. It will not be easy, but the light will be with you." I nodded, though my heart was still heavy with doubt. How will I know what to say? How will I know who to tell? Jesus' gaze remained unwavering. "Speak from the truth within you, Samuel. Trust in the light. It will guide your words, and it will touch those who are ready to listen." The light around us shifted, growing brighter, more intense. I felt its pull once more, but this time it wasn't toward another vision or revelation. It was calling me back to the world I had left behind. My heart ached with the weight of what I now knew, but I understood that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The next moment was jarring, as though I had been thrust into icy water. My chest burned, my lungs struggling to draw breath. The sterile fluorescence of the hospital room replaced the soft glow of the light. Sounds flooded my ears, the rhythmic beeping of machines, hurried voices of medical staff, and the smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. I was back. "Rabbi Adler, he's awake!" a voice exclaimed, urgent but relieved. I turned my head, each movement requiring monumental effort, and saw Sarah by my bedside. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her hands trembling as they clutched a prayer book against her chest. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're alive." She rushed to my side, taking my hand in hers, her warmth grounding me amidst the whirlwind of sensations. I could feel her love, her relief, and yet I was numb, unable to process everything at once. My mind wasn't here, it was still in the presence of Jesus, in the light that had revealed truths I could barely comprehend. For days I wrestled with the weight of what I had seen, marveled at my recovery, calling it miraculous, while Sarah praised God for saving my life. She asked me what I had experienced, but I deflected, saying I was still too weak to talk about it. The truth was, I wasn't ready, not yet. When I finally returned home, I found myself drawn to my study. It was a familiar sanctuary, lined with shelves of books on the Torah, the Talmud, and commentaries from generations of rabbis. But now, those texts, which had always been my foundation, seemed incomplete. They were still sacred, still vital, but they felt like pieces of a larger puzzle I had only just begun to see. Late one night, unable to sleep, I reached for a book I had never considered reading before, a New Testament. It was a copy given to me years ago by a well-meaning acquaintance, one I had kept out of courtesy but never opened. Now my hands trembled as I turned the pages, unsure of what I was looking for, but knowing I had to start somewhere. As I read, the words felt foreign at first, but echoes of the Torah and the prophets began to emerge. The connections between the Old and New Testaments, which Jesus had shown me, leapt off the pages. Verses I had once dismissed as irrelevant now held profound meaning. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Those words struck me deeply, resonating with everything I had been shown. My nights became a cycle of study and prayer, wrestling with the implications of what I was learning, the prophecies of the suffering servant, the pierced hands and feet, the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. They all pointed to Jesus. The truth was undeniable. But knowing the truth and sharing it were two very different things. I couldn't escape the fear of what would happen if I spoke openly about my experience. Would my congregation abandon me? Would my family turn away? The thought of losing their love and respect was almost unbearable. Yet in the quiet moments of reflection, I felt the presence of Jesus again, not as a vision, but as a calm reassurance deep within me. "You are loved," he had said, "and now you are called." His words echoed in my mind, urging me to take the next step, no matter how difficult it might be. Finally, I made a decision. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. The truth wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who sought to understand God's plan. I didn't know how my story would be received or what challenges lay ahead, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. With a deep breath, I resolved to take that leap of faith, trusting that the same presence who had guided me through the light would guide me now. The first thing I remember is the sound, a steady, rhythmic beeping that seemed to echo endlessly in my ears. It was foreign yet somehow reassuring, a metronome of life pulling me back from the edges of eternity. My chest burned as though it had been crushed under a great weight, and my head throbbed with relentless pressure. I opened my eyes slowly, the brightness of the room overwhelming at first. The sterile light above me was a stark contrast to the warmth of the divine radiance I had just left. For a moment I was disoriented, caught between two realities. The light, the presence, and the truth I had experienced seemed so vivid, so undeniably real, and yet here I was, back in the confines of the physical world. The thin sheets of the hospital bed felt rough against my skin, and the hum of machines surrounded me. I turned my head, each movement requiring monumental effort, and saw faces, concerned, relieved, familiar. "Samuel," a voice whispered, trembling with emotion. It was Sarah. She was by my side, her hands clutching mine as though letting go would mean losing me all over again. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but they sparkled with a mixture of love and overwhelming relief. "You're alive," she said, her voice breaking into a sob. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against my hand, and I could feel the warmth of her tears against my skin. "Oh, thank God you're alive." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice barely more than a rasp. "Sarah—" It was all I could manage, but it was enough. Her head shot up, and she looked at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of disbelief, joy, and something deeper, something sacred. The medical staff swarmed around me then, their voices a flurry of instructions and medical jargon. "He's stable," one nurse said. "Vitals are improving," another added. They adjusted machines, checked monitors, and scribbled notes on clipboards. None of it registered fully. My mind was elsewhere, still caught in the light, in the presence of Jesus. As the initial chaos subsided and the medical staff gave us some space, Sarah remained by my side, her grip on my hand unrelenting. "I thought I'd lost you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The doctors said it was a miracle. They said you shouldn't have made it. A miracle." The word hung in the air, heavy with me. How could I begin to explain to her what I had experienced? How could I find the words to describe the light, the presence, the truth that had been revealed to me? I wasn't ready, not yet. The memories were too vast, too profound, and I needed time to process them before sharing. Over the next few days my body began to heal, but my soul felt as though it had been cracked wide open. The doctors called my recovery remarkable, attributing it to a combination of medical intervention and sheer luck. But I knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. I had been sent back for a purpose, though the weight of that purpose pressed heavily on my heart. Sarah stayed with me as much as the hospital allowed, her presence a constant source of comfort. She asked me, gently at first, about what I had experienced. "Do you remember anything?" she would ask, her eyes searching mine for answers. I wanted to tell her. I truly did. But I found myself, how could I tell her that everything we had believed, everything we had built our lives upon, was only a piece of a much larger truth? How could I tell her that I had stood in the presence of the very figure we had dismissed for so long? "I need time," I would say, and she would nod, her concern evident, but her patience unwavering. She had always been my anchor, and even now, in the midst of my turmoil, she remained steadfast. When I was finally discharged and allowed to return home, I felt a strange sense of disconnection from the world around me. The familiar sights and sounds of our home, once so comforting, now seemed almost alien. I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong here anymore, not fully. My soul still yearned for the light, for the presence that had enveloped me so completely. I spent hours in my study, surrounded by the books and texts that had shaped my understanding of God and the world. The Torah, the Talmud, the commentaries of countless rabbis, they were all there, their pages worn and familiar. But as I read them, I felt as though I were seeing them for the first time. The words, once so clear and certain, now seemed to shimmer with layers of meaning I had never noticed before. It wasn't just the Torah that called to me. Late one night, unable to sleep, I found myself reaching for a book I had never considered reading before, a New Testament. It had been given to me years ago by a well-meaning acquaintance, and I had kept it out of courtesy, though I had never opened it. Now, as I held it in my hands, I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As I began to read, the words felt foreign at first, like stepping into a land I had never visited. But as I continued, I began to see echoes of the Torah and the prophets within its pages. The teachings of Jesus, his parables, his life, they weren't separate from the truths I had always known. They were their fulfillment. The words of Isaiah came to mind. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with. I had always understood this passage as a metaphor, a poetic description of Israel's struggles, but now I saw it differently. I saw him, Jesus, in every word, every prophecy, the suffering servant, the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world, the one who was pierced for our transgressions. It was all him. I spent night after night poring over the Scriptures, comparing the Old and New Testaments and finding connections I had never imagined. The sacrificial system, the prophecies, the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they all pointed to Jesus. It wasn't about abandoning the Torah or rejecting my identity as a Jew. It was about seeing the Torah in its fullness, understanding that its promises had been fulfilled in ways far beyond my comprehension. But even as my understanding grew, so did my fear. How could I share this truth with Sarah, with my children, with my How could I tell them that the foundation of our faith, while sacred and true, was only a part of the greater plan? The thought of their rejection, their disappointment, was almost unbearable. And yet I felt the presence of Jesus in those quiet moments, not as a vision, but as a calm reassurance deep within me. "You are called," he had said, and those words echoed in my heart. This truth wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who sought to know God, to understand his plan. I couldn't keep it to myself, no matter how terrifying the prospect of sharing it might be. One evening, as Sarah and I sat together in the stillness of our living room, I took her hand in mine. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling. Her eyes met mine, filled with both concern and love. And so, with a deep breath, I began to share the story of the light, the presence, and the truth that had been revealed to me. The words spilled out slowly at first, but as I spoke, they gained strength, like a river breaking through. I told her everything, my encounter with Jesus, the visions that connected the Torah to his life and sacrifice, and the overwhelming love and peace I had felt in his presence. As I spoke, I watched her face shift from confusion to disbelief and finally to something deeper, something I could only describe as wonder. When I finished, there was a long silence between us, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Samuel, this changes everything." "I know," I whispered, my heart aching with both fear and hope. "But it's the truth. I can't deny it." She reached out and placed her hand on my cheek, her touch gentle and grounding. "Then we'll face it together," she said. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I knew I wouldn't have to walk it alone. The decision to share my experience weighed on me like a great stone resting on my chest. For days I wrestled with the magnitude of what I was prepared. How could I, a rabbi, a teacher of the Torah, a guardian of tradition, stand before my congregation, my family, and my community to tell them what I had seen. How could I proclaim that Jesus was the Messiah we had awaited for generations, the fulfillment of the covenant I had spent my life honoring? And yet, I knew I could not stay silent. The truth I had been shown was too profound, too transformative to keep hidden. It began with Sarah. She had always been my confidant, my partner in all things, the one person I could trust completely. I knew she would listen, even if the words I spoke challenged everything we had built our lives upon. One evening, as the shadows of the setting sun cast long streaks of light across our living room, I sat beside her and took her hands in mine. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling. Her eyes searched mine, her expression a mixture of concern and patience. "Something happened to me when I was gone, when my heart—" She nodded, her grip tightening on my hands. "Take your time, Samuel." I told her everything. The light, the presence, the overwhelming sense of peace and love that had enveloped me. I described the visions, the way they revealed connections between the Torah and Jesus, how the stories and prophecies I had studied my entire life had taken on new meaning. And then I told her about Jesus himself, how he had spoken to me, how his presence had filled me with a truth I could not deny. As I spoke, tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She didn't interrupt, didn't question, only listened, her face a canvas on which 1,000 emotions played out. When I finished, the silence between us was heavy, charged with the weight of everything I had said. I braced myself for her response, for rejection or disbelief. But when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost reverent. "Samuel," she said, her words trembling with emotion, "this changes everything." "I know," I whispered, my own voice breaking. "But it's the truth." Her tears began to fall then, and she reached out to cup my face in her hands. "If this is the truth, then we will face it together." In that moment I felt a surge of gratitude so profound it left me speechless. I had feared that my experience would drive a wedge between us, but instead it had drawn us closer. Sarah's faith, her love, her openness to the possibility of something beyond what we had always known. These became my anchor, grounding me as I prepared to take the next step. The following Shabbat, I stood before my congregation, my heart pounding in my chest. The synagogue was filled with familiar faces, people who had trusted me to guide them in their faith, to lead them in prayer and study. I had stood at this bima countless times before, but never had I felt the weight of my responsibility as I did now. I began with a prayer, as I always did, asking for God's guidance and wisdom. Then, taking a deep breath, I looked out at the faces before me and began to speak. "Brothers and sisters," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within me, "I have always stood before you as a teacher of the Torah, a servant of God, and a guardian of our sacred traditions. It has been my honor and my privilege to guide this community, to share with you the wisdom of our ancestors, and to walk with you in faith. But today I must share something that goes beyond anything I have ever taught or understood." I paused, the silence in the room pressing against me like a physical force. "A few weeks ago, as many of you know, I suffered a heart attack. I came closer to death than I ever have before, and in that moment, something extraordinary happened." I told them about the light, the presence, the overwhelming peace and love that had surrounded me. I described the visions, the way they had shown me how the Torah's teachings and prophecies pointed to a truth I had never considered. And then I told them about Jesus. As I spoke his name, I felt a ripple of unease pass through the congregation. Murmurs broke out, and I saw skepticism, confusion, even anger in some of their faces. But I pressed on, recounting my encounter with him, the way his words and presence had revealed a truth that was undeniable. "Jesus is the Messiah," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "He is the fulfillment of the covenant, the one to whom the Torah has always pointed." I did not believe this. I could not have believed it. But now I cannot deny it. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Some people stood, shaking their heads as they walked out of the synagogue. Others remained in their seats, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and discomfort. But there were also those who stayed, who listened with a quiet intensity, their faces alight with curiosity, or perhaps understanding. One man, an elder I had known for years, stood and spoke. "Rabbi Adler," he said, his voice tinged with both respect and incredulity, "how can you claim this? How can you, who have always taught the Torah, now speak of Jesus as the Messiah?" I met his gaze, my heart aching with the weight of my response. "Because the Torah does not stand apart from him," I said. "It is fulfilled in him. Everything I have taught, everything I have believed, has led to this truth. I understand that this is difficult to accept. It was for me too. But the truth does not change, no matter how hard we may try to ignore it." The rest of the service was a blur. By the time I stepped down from the bima, I was exhausted, my legs trembling beneath me. Sarah was waiting for me, her presence a quiet reassurance. "You did what you had to do," she said, her voice steady. "The rest is in God's hands." In the days and weeks that followed, the reactions from the community were varied. Some members of the congregation stopped attending services, unable to reconcile my words with their understanding of faith. Others approached me privately, their questions and doubts mingled with a hesitant openness. And then there were those who, like Sarah, embraced this new understanding, their own faith deepening as they explored the connections between the Torah and Jesus. I began to speak more openly, not just within the synagogue, but beyond it. I shared my story with other rabbis, with members of other faith communities, with anyone who was willing to listen. The conversations were often difficult, filled with skepticism and resistance, but also moments of profound connection and transformation. Through it all, I held on to the words Jesus had spoken to me. "You are called." Those words became my anchor, reminding me that my mission was not to convince or convert, but to share the truth and trust that it would reach those who were ready to hear it. My journey was far from over. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges I could not yet foresee. But I walked it with a newfound sense of purpose, knowing that I was not alone. The light that had guided me in death now illuminated my life, leading me forward into the unknown. The road ahead was not one I could have imagined, not even in my most introspective moments. Each step felt like walking a tightrope stretched between two worlds, one steeped in centuries of tradition, the other illuminated by the profound truth I had encountered. My life as Samuel Adler, the rabbi, the teacher, the guide of my congregation, had been forever changed by what I had seen and by the undeniable calling placed on my heart. But embracing this transformation was just the beginning. Now I had to live it. The first glimmers of a new purpose took shape within my home. Sarah, my steadfast partner through years of devotion and struggle, remained by my side, her faith growing as she immersed herself in the fullness of what I had revealed to her. Our conversations were no longer bound by the questions of how best to interpret the Torah's laws, but instead shifted toward the awe-inspiring connections we discovered between those teachings and the life of Jesus. It was a process, long, emotional, and marked by moments of doubt and wonder. We would sit together late into the night, poring over the scriptures, flipping from the pages of the Torah to those of the New Testament, and marveling at how the pieces fit together. "It's like discovering the other half of a bridge," Sarah said one evening, her finger tracing the lines of Isaiah's prophecy about the suffering servant. "It's always been here, waiting for us to walk across." Her support became my foundation, especially as I began to take the first steps of sharing my story beyond the walls of our home. I started small, conversations with close friends, discussions held over coffee or during evening walks. Each time, I braced myself for rejection, for skepticism, for outright hostility. And often, That's exactly what I encountered. People I had known for years looked at me as though I had betrayed them, their faces clouded with confusion and disappointment. "How can you say these things, Samuel?" one of my oldest friends asked during one such conversation. "You've always been the one to guide us in truth, in the ways of our people. And now you're telling me you believe in him?" I met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. "I'm not abandoning the truth," I said quietly. "I'm embracing the fullness of it. The Torah hasn't changed. It's still the foundation of everything we believe. But now I see how it points to Jesus, how it finds its completion in him." His expression was a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, and I knew I couldn't force him to accept what I had come to understand. All I could do was plant the seed, trusting that the same light that had guided me would guide others in their own time. The real test came when I stood before my congregation again. It had been weeks since I first shared my experience, and the fallout had been significant. Attendance had dropped, and many of those who remained viewed me with suspicion. But there were also those who stayed, who listened, who asked questions. It was for them that I continued to speak, to teach, to share the truths that had been revealed to me. One Shabbat morning, as I stood at the bima, I looked out at the faces before me and felt a deep sense of love for each person in the room. These were the people I had guided for years, the ones who had trusted me with their faith, their struggles, their joys. I knew that what I was about to say would challenge them, but I also knew it was what I had been called to do. "Today we read from the Torah," I began, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We read the story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac, a story of obedience, faith, and trust in God's plan. But this story, like so many in the Torah, is more than just history. It's a shadow, a glimpse of something greater." I paused, letting the words sink. Abraham's willingness to give up his son points us to another father, one who gave his son as the ultimate sacrifice, not for obedience alone, but for love, for redemption. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. "I know these words are difficult," I continued. "They were difficult for me. But I stand before you now, not as a man abandoning the Torah, but as one who has seen its fulfillment. Jesus is the Messiah we have awaited, the one who brings together the promises of the Torah with the hope of redemption." Some people shook their heads, their expressions a mixture of anger and disbelief. Others leaned forward, their eyes filled with questions they weren't yet ready to voice. But a few, just a few, nodded, their faces alight with a tentative understanding. It was those moments that gave me the strength to keep going, to continue sharing even when the path ahead seemed fraught with uncertainty. Beyond the synagogue, my message began to reach a wider audience. I wrote extensively, detailing my journey, my visions, and the profound connections between the Old and New Testaments. My words were met with a range of reactions, from heartfelt gratitude to outright hostility. Some hailed my story as a testament to the power of faith, while others dismissed it as the ramblings of a man who had lost his way. Through it all, I held on to the words Jesus had spoken to me: "You are loved and you are called." Those words became my anchor, reminding me that my mission was not to convince or convert, but simply to share the truth and trust that it would reach those who were ready to hear it. In time, my relationships deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sarah and I grew closer, our shared faith becoming the bedrock of a new chapter in our lives. My children, though initially hesitant, began to see the sincerity of my convictions and the peace it had brought me. Even those in my congregation who had initially resisted began to ask questions, to explore the scriptures with new eyes. Today I stand not as a man torn between two worlds, but as one who has found unity in the truth that binds them together. My Jewish identity and my faith in Jesus are not contradictions. They are two sides of the same divine plan. The Torah remains sacred to me, its teachings a constant source of wisdom and guidance. But now I see it in its fullness, its promises fulfilled in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The path is not always easy. There are still moments of doubt, of struggle, of longing for the certainty I once knew. But in those moments I remember the light, the presence, and the words that changed everything. You are loved, and you are called. As I continue this journey, my hope is not just to share my story, but to inspire others to seek the truth, even when it challenges everything they thought they knew. For the truth, as I have learned, is not just an idea or a concept, it is a person. And encountering that truth has transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. This is my new chapter, my new calling, my new purpose, and it is only the beginning.